I was a financial supporter of TPUSA. I will continue to be, and I recognize that Charlie Kirk, above anyone else, brought the election home during the last season for Donald Trump and pressed more young men into the conservative culture than has ever been done in the history. He was truly one of the most effective orators and debaters that has ever persisted in our modern era, and that is why on September 10th, 2025 is the day that debate died.
You weren't made to be average. You weren't born to coast through life hoping for things to work out. Deep inside you, there's a fire, a relentless drive. It's time to ignite it. Stop apologizing for wanting more. Stop explaining your ambition to people who are afraid of their own. This world isn't handed to the weak. It's taken by the strong, the focused, the disciplined, and it's about time you stopped waiting for permission to be great. You want results? Then stop acting like everyone else. Average doesn't get remembered. Mediocrity doesn't build empires. If you want to rise, if you want to lead, dominate, and transform, then you have to become something this world fears. You have to become a savage. A savage doesn't beg for approval. A savage doesn't wait for the perfect moment. A savage makes the moment perfect by sheer force of will.
Many excellent commentators will tell large tales about Charlie Kirk, well-deserved, and he has my prayer and sympathy to his family, Erica, and their two small children. And really, when I was on the Young Dad pod last night, it was evident that those children will go to bed tonight without a father, and that is a great tragedy that should not be undersold in this political discourse and this season. However, I do want to talk about some of the ways that when a cultural hegemonic force like the left or the right is losing power, the type of desperate measures that they've taken historically in the last 50 years specifically to try to reinforce their cultural power, or perhaps like a wild cat, when they're cornered, they just begin scratching and biting. But let's look a little bit at what the right wing did in the 60s when they were losing power and what the left is doing today. Of course, we know in the civil rights movement of the 1960s and all of the cultural upheaval that was going on in those days, there were several assassination attempts and completions that occurred on people that were in the ascendant left. So at that time, the new world, liberal world order was forming, and many of the forces that had been the cultural hegemony up until that point were getting nervous. And so in 1963, John F. Kennedy, of course, the Democratic president at the time, his life was taken in Dallas, Texas. Malcolm X in 1965. Debates swirl still today about both of those attempts and who exactly was behind them. Martin Luther King in 1968. And then, of course, Robert F. Kennedy, whose ripple effects still affect our polity today because of his son being involved in the Trump administration. Those four attempts or completed attempts at deletion led most of us to just question what kind of world were we living in, my parents' generation to question what kind of world were they living in. But really, the right wing was the cornered cat at that time who had become nervous, and we can always obfuscate the point by saying that these were just individual actors who had, motives of mental illness and all those things. I'm tired of that. I mean, it was obvious at that time that the left-wing politics was on the ascendancy, and that they were being attempted to be stifled by the hegemonic force of yesteryear. Now, let's fast forward to today. In the 2020s, the right wing is on the ascendancy. It took essentially 2 generations before there was a little bit more pendulum swinging back to the right, and then in the last 4 years, especially under the COVID tyranny, that swung even further, along with the power of speech that people like Charlie Kirk brought to the foreground of their end of the right-wing political movement. Quite frankly, my end of the right-wing political movement. That pendulum has swung further than what I would have guessed could be possible within 50 years, let alone 5. And so God bless his memory, and God bless his family. I would also encourage anyone to try to support them in any way you can, even if that is thoughts and prayers, which are not impotent. However, in the 2020s, we see that the cultural left is the one who seems to be embattled against losing their hegemony. And here are some of the attempts and completed political actions that they've taken to delete members of the right wing. Of course, we have President-elect Donald Trump, who was life was attempted at least twice and thwarted in 2024 by about 4 millimeters in God's own providence. We have, of course, Charlie Kirk, who passed away yesterday of his injuries in Utah. We have Miguel Uribe Turbay in Colombia, who was the conservative upswing candidate who was ultimately assassinated. The Alliance for Deutschland, or AfD, in Germany has suffered multiple attacks between 2024 and 2025. Candidates in offices have been had their offices set on fire. There have been violent attacks. There have been knife attacks, and the party itself has been placed under unprecedented intelligence surveillance. You wonder if Germany might be afraid of another right-wing movement in their country. I don't know. National rally candidates in France beginning in 2024 have been attacked while canvassing neighborhoods, as well as UK conservative Sir David Ames in 2021 was attacked and ultimately lost his life, along with the free speech suppression that's going on there, which is very clearly an attempt to dislocate some of the right-wing upswell in their communities. Comparative Insight says that the 1960s liberal leaders were assassinated as their movements surged against a retreating conservative establishment. In the 2020s, conservative leaders and parties worldwide have faced attacks, assassinations, and suppression as populism surges and the retreating liberal establishment is afraid. It's a mirror image. When the cultural tide shifts, those gaining ground often become the targets, but we will not retreat. The church, whether this was oriented to his faith or not, the church has been promised persecution, and we will not shrink back from that. And every time that someone attempts to stamp out the faith community, the dust goes out from under the boot and spreads and proliferates throughout society. And we will not be silent. And while we are promised persecution, the gates of hell will not stand against her, meaning the church, and we will not be silent. And I think if anyone was psychologically attuned, I don't know exactly what type of reaction they're hoping to get from the right, but these types of political takedowns usually do not result in the type of cultural upswell in your direction that you would want. And to be matter of fact, Charlie Kirk led a movement of young men who have gone more conservative than has ever been measured. And young men will change the culture. Young men do hold the cards in the use of force. Young men do have the cultural bastion of tomorrow. So I wouldn't piss them off too bad if I were you. But today we honor the life and ultimately the passing of Charlie Kirk. He was taken too soon. Pray for his wife and his family. God bless.